Alec Murdaugh at 4147 Moselle Road. I need the police to be ambulance immediately. My wife and child have been shot badly.
This is your wife and son?
Did I kill my wife? Yes. No, David.
It was just so bad. They did it so bad.
There's not one shred of evidence.
One question begets another, which begets another.
I go by Buster.
Do you have any idea who's done this?
Welcome into our live team coverage here. Judy Gatson along with Greg Adeline. Our Nick Neville will be joining us a little bit later. Insight and analysis from our legal expert, Carl B. Grant. If you missed the final day of the closing arguments in this trial, you have missed a lot, but don't worry, we're going to bring you up to date. Greg, some really big developments today. Jim Griffin really trying to convince this jury that Alec Murdaugh is a liar, but not a murderer. But the prosecution, Meadors, pushing back powerfully on almost every single point Griffin made.
Yeah, there was certainly high drama in the courtroom in both of those closing arguments and also the rebuttal. Jim Griffin got up and his task was tall, you have to admit. After a statement from Creighton Waters yesterday that was very effective, Jim Griffin had a tall task, but all in all, he sought to cast doubt on every single facet of this investigation, putting SLED squarely in the spotlight, saying that there were areas in this investigation that they missed, saying that SLED was not thorough in their investigation, and saying that ultimately there were chances for them to basically find out that Alec Murdaugh didn't commit these crimes, to take him out of the circle of interest, and they say that they failed to do so, that they basically placed Alec Murdaugh in the crosshairs of this investigation from day one. So that was a big part of his argument to the jurors, saying that SLED was by no means effective at that crime scene, that there were things that they missed. And then he went to hammer the motive in this case, basically saying that there isn't one. The state has for weeks, through many different witnesses and many different examples of testimony, they have hammered the idea that Alec Murdaugh committed these crimes because of a financial firestorm or to gather sympathy. Jim Griffin said today that that simply does not add up. At every single turn, he was talking about that motive and just saying that it doesn't exist. Asking those jurors time and time again, asking them, why would Alec Murdaugh do this? He's a loving father. He's a loving spouse. Why would he ever commit these murders? Because of some financial problems that are nebulous, at least in Jim Griffin's estimation? That's what he was asking the jury, saying that there wasn't a solid or concrete evidence for motive in this case, even though, again, the state has tried over many weeks to establish that motive as part of their case. Interestingly enough, John Meadors said that you don't necessarily need motive in this case. That's the state prosecutor who is arguing today. Says motive is not necessary in some cases because, after all, people intend to kill for different reasons, and none of them sometimes make sense. So that was part of the argument from Jim Griffin today. But another thing that he did was he hammered the idea that there is a lack of direct evidence in this case. He says that this is certainly a circumstantial case, but there's none of that hard evidence that is so crucial sometimes in some of these investigations, crime scene investigations, forensic analysis, DNA, blood, talking about all of the gun evidence, saying that the guns have never been found. So he kind of harped on that, and especially as it comes to blood, Jim Griffin made an argument that said, for as grisly and as gruesome as that crime scene was, you would have expected that Alec Murdaugh would have had a lot of blood on him, but in fact, he did not. Now, interestingly, the prosecution has made a similar case saying that, well, let's face it, he was too clean. But that was not Griffin's argument today. He said that he should have had much more blood on him. And so if Alec Murdaugh had committed these crimes, we're going to play a soundbite for you here, because he asked the question, why was there not more physical evidence in this case? Why did he not leave footprints? Why did he not leave some of that critical forensic evidence behind that would have ultimately been conclusive to convict Alec Murdaugh? Take a listen.
How could he have butchered Maggie and Paul without leaving a trace of evidence within a matter of minutes? How? We went from why, now how. And the answer to the how is he couldn't. But this is the wrong question to be asking yourselves. Because the question that you are tasked with answering is, has the state presented evidence that proves beyond a reasonable doubt showing that Alec butchered Maggie and Paul without leaving a trace of evidence, all within a matter of minutes.
And so following that closing argument by Jim Griffin, let's bring in trial attorney Carl B. Grant, because John Meadors then pushed back and reminded this jury it's not beyond all doubt. It's just beyond reasonable doubt. So tell us how important that is.
That's very, very important. As John pointed out, you can't answer all questions. Sometimes they're just questions, and I thought that was very effective. In fact, I've never heard a prosecutor put it that way. I thought that was pretty cool. Sometimes they're just questions, but the thing is, they have to prove their case using competent evidence. I pointed that out before. Competent evidence that persuades the jury and firmly convinces the jury that this man is guilty. And when I think about all the evidence that's been presented, all the issues that have been argued, this is a case now that has fallen down to this question. It's the why factor as far as the motive, and arguably the prosecution has had some problems with this motive. The defense has said it's a ridiculous motive. And although you don't have to prove motive, what's the first logical thing that a jury is going to ask themselves when they walk in that jury room? Why would Alex do this? Because they ask that all the time. Motive is not necessary. They don't have to prove it, but that's the question. Now, you got the why factor on that side.
That's right.
But then you got the lie factor on the other side. So you got the why versus the lie.
And you know what, Carl, as we have about a minute left, that was the other thing in terms of this jury. They made the point that circumstantial evidence carries just as much weight as direct evidence.
It
that
does.
They have to follow the letter of the law in evaluating.
They do. And if this jury is not convinced beyond a reasonable doubt, and then you have people with strong opinions on each side, it could be a very long deliberation because of the fact of no solid direct evidence. And that's the problem here. So let's see what happens. I mean, it's going to be a long deliberation, I think.
Well, listen, we've heard that it could go as late as 8 o'clock tonight, as late as 10 o'clock tonight. We're coming up on 2 hours of jury deliberation. We've not received word that they've ordered any dinner. That would certainly be an indication that they plan to stay. But I think Carl has boiled it down to an effective point, the why factor versus the lie factor. We will have your live team coverage here throughout the evening. As long as the jury is here deliberating, we will be here too. Our live coverage on air and online on WYSTV.com. We've got the weather covered for you as well. Coming up next, First Alert meteorologist Von Gaskin going to tell us about the storms we had here in Walterboro today and also what's ahead in our forecast.